Do you know, modern technology has definitely improved our lives. We have the entire diversity of the world before us, all that knowledge available at the press of a button, but all this diversity also has a downside. The age of information technology has accelerated the exchange of information and driven technological progress. The World Wide Web can be used to gather information, plan and commit crimes, and today's history proves exactly that. This story was one of the first crime stories related to the internet. Christina Long was born on March 17, 1989, in the small town of Fairfield, Connecticut, USA. The first years of her life were not easy and bright, but the end of this fate was even more tragic. The girl moved shortly before the events in question in 2001 to her Aunt Shelley. The reason for this were serious problems in her family. The girl's mother suffered from an addiction that was related to the years-long use of illegal substances. In the years leading up to her daughter's departure, the woman had repeatedly struggled with various problems. Her life was gradually going downhill. She regularly consumed heavy illegal substances and did not care at all about her child. The worst was that the girl had observed her mother's condition deteriorate for many years and also suffered from all the associated problems. The house in which the girl lived became a real brothel. Different men kept coming here, from whom the mother bought illegal substances. The woman was too preoccupied with her addiction to take care of the girl. Christina was left to her own devices, which affected her daily activities and her school performance. The teachers complained to the principal, and his staff came to the call and found the woman in a frightening state, but the girl was fortunately normal. She continued to learn and do normal teenage things, even though it was difficult for her. Unlike her mother, she was not addicted to drugs. The social services decided to remove the student from the family and place her with another family member who was best suited for this task. Initially, the social workers examined the child's father, but the situation with him was not much better than with the biological mother. Their marriage began like a real dream, but only 2 years after the birth of the girl, the Long family broke up. The biological father decided not to start a family and began to lead a dissolute lifestyle. Women circulated in a continuous stream. He neither cared for his daughter nor for his former wife, who was suffering from severe addictions. Naturally, he was not the right person to obtain custody of a 12-year-old girl. Finally, it was decided that this environment was too dangerous and aggressive for the child. It was decided to take Christina away and find a good family. The choice fell on an aunt named Shelley Ryan. She proved to be the only caring person who sincerely wanted to help the girl and take her under her wing. She was 51 years old at that time. Christina's relative was a sales representative. For several years, she had been horrified by what was happening to her family and the life of her own sister. If she couldn't save her sister from addiction, she still considered it her duty to help her. She had always loved Christina and couldn't allow her to be raised by strangers. She was kind and wealthy enough to secure a future for herself and the schoolgirl, so the girl moved to the cozy suburb of Danbury, Connecticut, finally finding the child in conditions that were not indifferent to her. Although her aunt had custody of her, she behaved like a real mother. They quickly found common ground and communicated closely with each other. Gradually, Christina began to forget the corners of life with an addicted mother, where a different dealer came every day. It is noteworthy that her biological mother did not hesitate to use her body to finance her addiction, and all of this was witnessed by her daughter. In September 1989, Shelley enrolled the girl in a public school, one of the best educational institutions in the city, expensive and prestigious. However, the woman did not worry about the costs. She only wanted the best for Christina. Shelley had worked hard her entire life. She had built a career and achieved excellent performance in her profession. One of the reasons she decided to send her child to a public school was the higher level of safety compared to municipal facilities. The woman feared that Christina would be exposed to another hostile environment, but she wanted to improve the girl's life. It is logical that a public school, which is usually attended by children of wealthier, more respected parents, offers a higher level of safety, and higher standards should also be applied to the students themselves. After all, Shelley not only wanted to keep her away from all the outcasts and bad people who constantly swirled through her life because of her mother, but she also wanted to improve the girl's life. Christina quickly made friends at her new school. The girl was sweet, friendly, and likable. Thanks to Shelley, other good qualities also began to develop in her, which had been suppressed by the years of indifference from her biological parents, who had turned their attention to the girl's success since they lived with their aunt. Christina had recovered after so many years of tyranny and the horrors of the brothel that her mother had organized in her own house. The girl fit perfectly into the new team, literally from the first days. Friendships were made, she became a cheerleader, and even took over the position of captain. In addition to her successes, she became increasingly sad. Shelley decided to find out what was depressing the teenager. According to Christina, all the children at the public school already had their own computers. They used the internet and learned to handle the PC. The young Long also asked her aunt for a computer. Christina longed for her family despite the years of indifference she had felt. She had no intention of getting in touch with them. She realized that she had absolutely no interest in her mother and her father, but she desperately wanted to communicate with her older sister Kosa, who was 19 years old and living in Japan. Furthermore, Christina believed that it would greatly help her education, as with the help of the internet, one could immediately get all the information needed for studying. Ultimately, this argument was decisive for the purchase. Shelley gave her niece a computer. Christina was happy and initially created an account to use the same chat rooms as her classmates. The student used a fictitious nickname instead of her real name but uploaded her real photos. However, she decided to lie about her age. At that time, she was 13, but the girl looked much older than her apparent age, even too old for a student. The girl wrote that she was already an adult when she finished her profile. On the same day, she was contacted by a man with the nickname Eclipso. They immediately began a conversation. The girl, inexperienced in the field of online communication, behaved in everyday life as quiet and friendly. It seemed that the student liked her new friend, so they quickly became friends. After Shelley bought a computer, she noticed that Christina was spending more and more time in virtual environments. The woman felt that the girl had disconnected from real life, and that worried her. The aunt was aware of the dangers of the internet, but had little idea how to deal with it. Shelley considered full control to be excessive. She repeatedly communicated with her niece, warning her about contact with strangers and similar things. In return, the girl reassured Shelley, saying that they did not communicate with strangers, shady people, arranged no acquaintances, and all contacts were accounts of other children from the public school. Shelley believed her. The woman often appeared curious but did not directly intrude into the teenager's private life. Instead, she simply went into her rooms and later looked over her shoulder at the screen and distracted her with usual questions. Every time she saw that the student was meeting with friends from the educational institution, she reassured herself again. In the meantime, Christina communicated more and more with the young man online. Their acquaintance began with the usual question, "How are you?" But it quickly turned into an exchange of ordinary photos. The girl feared that her partner would not want to continue communication if he found out how old she really was, so she convinced him that she was 16. Their communication became increasingly open. As later turned out, it soon reached a new level. One evening, Shelley noticed that Christina had locked herself in her room. She was apparently chatting on the internet, and her aunt suspected that something was wrong. She was still worried that the girl had isolated herself from real life. She seemed to spend all her free time on the internet. Christina was no longer interested in activities or meetings in real life, apart from walks to the local shopping center every Friday after practice. The woman feared that her warnings had not been heeded. That evening, Shelley knocked on the bedroom door. She was worried about her niece, but as always, her aunt was reassured when Christina answered that she was chatting with her cheerleader friends. The student refused to open the door. In fact, Christina was writing an ennui with the person who had the nickname Eclipso and concealed this from everyone. As she was about to go to bed, the man wrote that he wanted to meet her in real life. The young man wrote that he would visit her on May 17, 2002. This message excited Christina enormously. The events were overwhelming for a young student. It was all new. She desperately wanted to meet this man, but she was aware that Shelley would be against such contact. The girl knew that her aunt was against communication with strangers on the internet. The woman had told her more than once how it could end. Of course, Christina had a different opinion. She was sure that everything would be fine, made plans, dreamed that this young man could become the love of her life, and told her friends about it. Indeed, people often find each other online, but there are also high risks. Behind a beautiful account, a cruel and dangerous man could hide, a real criminal who acts on the net and lures innocent victims into his dangerous traps. Christina was aware of this risk, but she followed her heart and decided to come to this meeting at any cost and meet Eclipso in person. She assumed that Christina would have cheerleader training on May 17. The girl had told Shelley in advance that she would go to the shopping center with some of her friends after practice to shop and chat. The woman gladly accepted the news because she had previously had concerns about the socialization problems that a teenager can have when she is completely immersed in virtual life, and was therefore glad that the girl was returning to real life. However, in reality, Christina wanted to meet acquaintances from the internet. The time of the fateful appointment was approaching, which turned out to be truly fateful for the girl. She anxiously awaited this day, while continuing to feign plans for the evening. The girl was not irritated that Eclipso never mentioned his real name and did not show his face in photos. He described himself as a sporty young man, a basketball player. Christina was herself a sporty girl who looked older than her years, and thanks to their shared interests, they quickly found a common basis. On the day of the meeting, a young man who introduced himself as Carlos Pozo called Shelley's house in the morning. The woman could not speak with him because the girl was at school at that time. Christina then participated in a training session and returned home to change clothes and prepare for a shopping trip. Shelley wanted to drop her off at the shopping center where her niece was supposed to meet her friends. She had often gone shopping with her classmates before, so her behavior was not suspicious. On the way there, Shai inquired about Carlos, and Christina told a short story about this young man. He was an athlete from a neighboring school. Christina admitted that they had met online and sometimes played together. First of all, the woman asked how old he was. According to Christina, he had recently turned 14 years old, but Christina said nothing about plans to meet. The aunt was concerned and expressed her doubts, but her niece reassured her and said that she would not meet anyone but only communicate with this friend in the game. She said that the student was not yet ready for a serious relationship due to her age. Shelley believed her, even though she was worried. She literally had a bad feeling about it. The woman saw that Christine looked older, like a 16 or 17-year-old girl, and was quite attractive, so the woman had legitimate concerns. Somehow, the student managed to convince her aunt and calm her down. In fact, Christina had already been sending photos to Eclipso almost daily at that time, including pictures with an open visor that showed the man's particular admiration for the man. Photos of the girl in cheerleader uniform. The young people began to flirt, and then open communication began with regular photos. In fact, the girl herself was already in a relationship at such a young age as it later turned out. She even already had a sex life, so flirting over the internet was casually accepted. Her aunt made Christina pick up at around 5:40 p.m. near the entrance to the center. Shelley tried to get her niece to accompany her because the woman suspected something and wanted to make sure that the girl was really going to meet her school friends. But when they arrived, Christina quickly jumped out of the car, pointed to a group of young people, and said they were her friends. The woman had no time to understand anything because she was standing on the street and behind her, a line of cars had already formed. She believed the girl and drove off, so Christina succeeded in deceiving Shelley again. The aunt called out to her that she would pick her up at 9 p.m. That was the time when the stores began to close, and she had always picked her up from there before. The girl tried to plead for at least another half hour and called Shelley to come back no earlier than 9:30 p.m. However, the woman remained persistent and answered that she would come on time. Shelley was slightly late and arrived at the shopping center at 9 p.m. But contrary to her expectations, Christine was not in the parking lot. The woman waited for a while and became slowly nervous. She called her niece several times on her mobile phone, but she ignored the calls. Then the woman left her car in the parking lot and turned to the shopping center's security. At this late hour, there were very few customers here, but Christine apparently had no intention of leaving. Shelley turned to the security staff and asked about the whereabouts of the student. She described the girl and said that she was supposedly out with friends. The security staff immediately responded to the appeal and began checking the information, reviewing the surveillance cameras, and searching everywhere for the student. But there was no one like Christina in the shopping center. The aunt stayed there until 10:45 p.m. and waited for her, but Christina was still missing. The woman called several times on her mobile phone, but the teenager ignored the calls again. Then, Shelley decided to notify the police. They responded immediately to the call since it was a minor. They arrived at the shopping center and began communicating with the security staff, checked cameras in stores that had not yet closed, but no one in the shopping center saw the missing person. At the same time, the police spoke with Shelley herself to find out what kind of relationship existed between the woman and the student, and whether Christina might have run away for some reason. The aunt said that the communication and understanding between mother and daughter were excellent. The girl suffered neither from psychological disorders nor from addictions. She was an exemplary student, a beauty, and an athlete with great hopes. The student led a normal teenage life, with the only difference that she spent a lot of time on the internet in the last month. In Shelley's view, Christina could not have run away. She had no reason to do so. The aunt then called several friends of the missing girl, with whom she was supposed to meet that evening. She contacted several girls and boys from the school. The woman was astonished because none of them admitted that they were supposed to meet Christina at the shopping center that day. Furthermore, they claimed that they had never gone shopping with the missing person. All the children were checked, and the statements of the teenagers were confirmed. After school, they returned home and did not go anywhere. One of the friends provided very valuable information. After the girl's confession, Christina had been actively corresponding with an unknown man on the internet for several months. She described him as a 14-year-old high school student who was sporty. A friend of the missing person confessed that Christina was supposed to meet him for the first time in real life that evening. This was a big shock for Shelley, as she had no idea about these plans to meet a stranger. The woman had repeatedly talked with Christina about the dangers of the World Wide Web. She believed that her niece had listened to her and would not do anything stupid. Her aunt had never tried to fully control the girl's online activities. She believed that the relationship between them should be based on trust and was afraid of hurting her niece. When this information fell into the hands of the investigators, the police officers immediately began to find out who this mysterious young man was, with whom the student disappeared after a meeting. The investigator involved in the search for the missing girl quickly found out that it was a man named Carlos Era, who was harassing Shelley. As far as he understood, it was, however, a much older man than the 14-year-old student he claimed to be. The investigator immediately reported his suspicion to his aunt, who only knew Christina's story. The aunt told about the incident that Carlos had called her, as well as the story of the high school girl about the SMS with the 14-year-old athlete. When the woman found out that it could be an adult, she was horrified and realized that all the horrors she had told Christina about and warned her about might have become reality. The investigators contacted Shelley to gain access to the girl's computer. As it turned out, her contact person had at that time changed her account name and also her photos. In addition, the messenger they had been corresponding through was password protected. Shelley realized that these security measures made no sense for normal communication with the young man. The police had to apply for access to the account from the messenger's administration. Although this was quite difficult, An investigator had already logged into Christina's chat with the man after 2 hours. What was discovered in the correspondences was a real blow for Shelley. It turned out that Christina was communicating with several unknown young men simultaneously, had open correspondence with all of them, willingly engaged in flirting, exchanged provocative photos, and had sex with several older men at the same time. With another young man she repeatedly met for intimate contacts. After the first meetings, he asked her several times about the delay, but the partners used protection, so there was no pregnancy and they continued to have sex. From the correspondences, it emerged that the young people had no intention of forming relationships and families, but simply wanted to have fun. Apparently, she did not reveal her true self to everyone. Some teenagers knew how old the student really was, while others thought she was an adult. While reviewing the girl's correspondence, the investigators noticed 3 suspect accounts. They decided to examine 2 of them more closely. For 2 of the accounts on social media, data was requested, which came back the next morning. At this point, 10 hours had already passed since Christina's disappearance. Due to the information requests, the police found out that Carlos was a 22-year-old young man whom she met for the first time that day. Of course, the young man became the main suspect. The investigators quickly found out where he lived and went directly to his address. Fortunately, Carlos was at home, and the officers began to question him. The young man behaved suspiciously but denied any connection to Christina or any correspondence with her. At the same time, he stuttered. The young man was very nervous and took a long time to choose his answers. He spoke confusedly. It was obvious that he was hiding something. When the officer asked about the young man's alibi, he literally trembled. According to the young man, he had spent the evening before at home. Despite the obvious signs of excitement, Carlos did not confess to his involvement in the disappearance of the student, so the police had to verify his words. The investigators were sure that one of their letters, probably from Carlos, had kidnapped her and was holding her captive with violence. She urgently needed to be found and rescued before she was harmed. At this point, Christina had been missing for over 18 hours. The police realized that the maximum time span for searching for a missing person, during which the probability of finding the person alive is greatest, is only 48 hours. Since Carlos had not confessed to the kidnapping, they had to check the second account that seemed suspicious. It was a man named Saul from Reese. What was suspicious about this man was his bandaged arm, which was obviously recently injured. According to the young man, he had broken it the night before with the hood of a car. The young man also claimed not to know Christina, even though they were in active contact. As the investigators knew, the police officers also felt that he was hiding something because Saul behaved very aggressively and made confusing statements, just like Carlos. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence against him, so he had to be held until the circumstances were clarified. Notably, Saul was the same man with whom Christina had been regularly meeting for intimate encounters in recent months. The Friday shopping meetings with her high school friends were actually a cover-up, and were timed to coincide with the meetings in the car with Saul. Unfortunately, checking the 2 suspects did not bring the investigators any closer to finding the missing person as time passed. The police found out that Saul's parents lived in Brazil. On the second day, Saul was called in again for questioning. Under the pretext that he had lied during the first conversation with the police officers, he was shown the correspondence in which he was informed that the secret liaison with the student had been uncovered. The investigators began to ask suggestive questions, for example, about Christina's age, as she was a much younger girl. Even the fact that he had corresponded with her and exchanged explicit photos could be considered sexual harassment. The young man was therefore nervous, but the police suspected that he was involved in a much more serious offense. They applied several common techniques. They played the good cop and the bad cop and tried to catch him in unpleasant questions. Finally, Saul admitted that he had actually seen Christina on Friday evening. They walked through the shopping center and chatted animatedly. Then the man suggested that they leave her in his car in the parking lot in peace. She agreed, and the young man admitted that there were intimate contacts between them that were consensual. When the police asked about the age of the missing person, Saul said that he considered Christina to be of legal age, the age she had stated in her correspondence. He said what was confirmed by the police. This did not absolve the main suspect of her guilt. She was actually only 13, although she looked much older. She was colorful and dressed maturely. In any case, she did not look like she was an adult. Saul claimed that he did not know Christina's true age and complained that she had deceived him. Now the investigators had an argument with which they could finally break the perpetrator. However, the Brazilian man did not give up and believed that it was not his fault. According to him, the couple had separated immediately after the intimacy, but Christina wanted to meet another man. Saul simply went home. He had a family, a wife, and a child. He was an illegal immigrant. He worked in a restaurant. They lived in a house not far from the place where the meetings with the student took place. After this interrogation, the police's suspicion against this young man was confirmed. He could indeed have been the last person who saw Christina, but could it have been someone else? The police believed that Saul was lying, although the Brazilian man did not confess and continued with his arrest. 24 hours after the girl's disappearance, there was still no trace of her. The investigators went back to Carlos. They believed that the young man might also know something. It was not excluded that the girl had met with him after Saul. The main problem for Carlos was the fact that he knew that Christina was a minor. In the correspondence, Christina said she was 16. Still, the man also had correspondence, flirting, exchange of photos with the missing woman, including snapshots at the second meeting. With the police, the young man still stuttered in the same way. He seemed to be on the verge of panic, so the investigators tried to influence his unstable state, but he did not give up. 36 hours had passed since the disappearance, and there was still no word about Christina. The police had 2 suspects who both seemed to be in custody, and both were silent. Voluntary helpers and police officers had searched the town for 24 hours, but no trace of the missing person was found. At this point, FBI agents had already joined the investigation. They decided to subject both suspects to a lie detector test to find out if the young men knew what had happened to Christina. The lie detector showed that Carlos and Saul were lying. They both seemed suspicious. 40 hours after the disappearance, the Brazilian finally offered to bring Christina to the police officers. He took the investigators to his neighborhood, led them through 2 neighboring houses, and showed them the schoolgirl. Her corpse lay in a drainage pipe that ran behind the houses. The young man admitted that he had accidentally strangled her during sex. He claimed that he had consensual sex with her but had gone too far. The young man was simply confused and tried to release her. Unfortunately, that did not help. Instead of calling emergency services, he simply threw the corpse away in the hope of getting away with it. During the investigation, it turned out that Carlos had been intimate with Christina that same night, but not after Saul, rather before him. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for his relationship with the minor. Saul Race pleaded not guilty on all charges. The prosecution found him guilty of second-degree murder, sexual coercion, and harassment of a minor. No one believed his story of accidental strangulation. It was suspected that Saul had learned that Christina had contact with another man before him and had strangled her out of jealousy. He was found guilty and sentenced to a 30-year prison term, which was suspended for 25 years on probation. This case became a much-noticed case as it was one of the first murders in history committed with the help of the internet. Serious discussions were held about the predators who could meet on the World Wide Web. Who was who? What surprises the future holds? My advice is not to get lost in the variety of new possibilities and to think about your own safety. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.